Let me begin by asking you about your assessment of the deal-making environment right now. Are you seeing pickup in deal volumes for private equity players?
You know, Harsha, the industry has gone through a very rough period over the last few years. And if you look back over the last decade and you try and examine the roughly $60 billion of private equity funding that has come into the Indian market, a large proportion of that came in the 2006, 7 and 8 timeframes. And those investments have now reached their exit horizons. And what has happened at that point in time is that the investments came in when valuations were high because growth expectations were high, but then thereafter growth tapered off, cost inflation increased. As a result, margins were squeezed, interest rates were high. So it turned out to be a very rough macro environment. My personal view is that at this point in time, we're now potentially approaching a new cycle in private equity in India,
Sure.
which is driven by the fact that there is lesser dry powder available for investment because fundraising environment has been very tough over the last few years.
Sure.
And at the same time, the industry is a lot more experienced and a lot more mature and a lot more aware of how to do business in India and how to evaluate and price the risks of doing business in India. So as a consequence of that, I believe that going ahead, the private equity industry in India will see a better time from return on investment perspective.
Darius, I want to talk about exits. The IPO route is pretty much shut in the public markets. Not much happening there. What exit strategies are PE players working in a situation like this?
You're right. You've touched upon the single most critical issue from the perspective of the private equity industry in India. Achieving exits in a manner that we return significant quantum of capital back to investors and with reasonable rates of return is really critical. And if that can be achieved, then there's going to be no shortage of funding available to come into India thereafter. If that is not done, then question marks will remain about the private equity story in India. And as you look at the exit options that are available to us, we've seen that over the last few years, few and far between some IPOs have happened, but unfortunately the IPO window has been shut more than it's been closed.
Sure.
An area where we're seeing significant exit opportunities is in the space of strategic sales, right, where private equity funded companies are being sold to foreign players that are looking to enter India by way of acquisition. In some cases, we're also seeing strategic exits happening to larger Indian players where leading Indian players are looking for consolidation and hence happy to acquire smaller companies. We are also seeing some exits by way of trade sales where minority parts of companies are sold to other financial investors. And finally, a relatively newer exit option that we're seeing, but one that will become more important as we go ahead, is that we're seeing more private equity to private equity sales, where one fund that has been invested for its investment horizon of maybe 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years is now looking to sell to another fund that is looking to make fresh commitments.